Hi, it's Steve Brand again, and I'm with Gene Carr, who is a serial entrepreneur, and he has learned a lot in his career. And welcome, Gene. How you
Thank
doing?
you. To be here. Appreciate it.
He's from the beautiful Berkshires, where the summer was great, and the winter actually is probably going to be beautiful as well, but a little bit cold.
A little cold.
Yeah. So, Gene, I'm become very curious recently about how entrepreneurs learn, and not just straightforward, simple, I take a course, but in your career, what do how do you learn? How do you learn new things throughout your career when you get a new venture or just in entrepreneurship in general?
Sure. I think look, entrepreneurship is the act of constant learning, and the learning comes from a lot of different sources. I would say the least valuable are books, although there are some really important books. But I consume a tremendous amount of information all the time, with the notion that what I want to do is try to become an expert. I want to become the expert in whatever field I'm working in. And so what I need to do is read a tremendous amount about what's going on in the industry, whether those are blogs, podcasts, newspaper articles. I have Google alerts set up on a bunch of companies that we track as competitors. I read press releases. I'm a voracious podcast listener in the tech world. I want to sort of understand the big trends that are going on. And then I read blog posts by colleagues that I trust. I look in LinkedIn, on LinkedIn stories. Basically, there's no end. There's no end to the learning. And what's, of course, different about today than, let's call it 10 years ago, is that there's so much information. 10 years ago, it was, let's call it harder to get information. You were relying on print materials and maybe radio shows if you happen to listen to them, or interviews. Now, all of this information is out there. And so it's a matter of curating what you're going to learn and subscribing to the right newsletters, reading articles as you go. So I think the answer is that your mindset as an entrepreneur has to be always learning. You have to be curious. And I guess the corollary, let me just say it, is that the corollary is don't be arrogant. Don't think you know everything. In fact, the more that you decide you don't know very much, the more curious you're going to be, the more you're going to be open to learning, the more you're going to be open to saying, aha, I have an interesting idea. That's, I'm much happier grabbing somebody's good idea than claiming some brilliant idea of my own. So I think all of entrepreneurship is an act of constant learning.
Yeah, you've been an entrepreneur for a long time, and you've had to navigate different industries throughout your career. But as you look back, maybe
Yep.
as an early stage entrepreneur or a younger entrepreneur, not that you're old, but when you were younger, and now it's so, when you were starting off, it was not as overwhelming. So
Yep.
how do you imagine someone young trying to navigate the hordes of data that is available? I mean, it's free, it's available, you could find it anywhere. Like,
Sure.
how should people be able to navigate that information to feel like they're getting things that you trust, that's,
Yep.
as you said, curated? Like, how do you deal with that? How should people deal with that?
Yeah, I think you look, we all use filters in our lives to suss out what's valuable and what's not. And I think the same filter that you use to filter out who your friends are going to be or what courses you're going to take, you have to use that filter for incoming information. For instance, I sign up for lots and lots of newsletters, lots of them. And after a month, I ask myself, am I reading that newsletter? Am I learning anything from it? Do I think these people are smart? And at that point, either you keep it and you make it part of your life, or you delete it and you move on. So look, there's only so much time that you're going to have. What you have to do is really constantly reevaluate, where is the most valuable information coming from? Who do you really trust? and then focus on those people, and then get rid of all the other noise, because you can't possibly consume everything. So you've got to be discriminating, and the best way to do it is try some stuff, listen to a podcast of this person or that person, look at this newspaper, look at this online journal, and follow people that you think are smart. Also, do the same by asking your friends, what podcasts do they listen to? What newspapers do they listen to? You're doing it exactly the same way as you would curate your own social media feed. You sort of lean in on the things that are working, and you discard all the stuff that's not.
It's interesting. As I know that you've done some work in the museum area, and they curate exhibits. I think about, and I used to be in the museum business. You think about museums where
Yep.
5% of their collection is in front of you.
Right.
Anything that you've learned from that, and I know you weren't in the curatorial side, but when curators make those decisions, is there anything you learn about curating content that maybe curators in museums sort of like do for the public?
No, it's a really interesting idea. I listen. It's a fascinating question. Curators at a museum will put together an art exhibition that has a point of view, much like somebody who's going to write, and I learned this many years ago, much like somebody who's going to write an essay where they have a topic sentence that says, I'm here to tell you about the life of pick a person. And by curating, let's say you set up an art exhibition about the art of Paris in the 1890s. Well, you have to have a point of view about what you think art was like. What is the story that you want to tell people, either about an artist or a particular time? So the curator comes into that challenge with a very particular point of view, and then selects artwork that tells a story. Now, if you're curating information, you need to put that same lens on, and the lens needs to be, to me anyway, needs to be, how can I, as an entrepreneur, run my business better? What is the thesis that I'm going into? And the thesis is, there are people out there that have information and techniques and tools and approaches that are better than what I have now, and I'm going to go out and really curate with the thesis that says I don't know everything, right? That's my thesis, is I don't know everything, and I want to put together the most potent and rich source of information on an ongoing basis that will allow me to tell a story to myself. Much like a curator tells a story to the public, you're creating your own story, and your own story needs to be based on what information do you need to know. As an example, let's say maybe the best example is hiring people is hard, and that's kind of a flip sentence. What's really hard about hiring people? Actually, the hiring is not hard. That's fine. You make somebody an offer. What's really hard is the interviewing process. People are terrible at interviewing. They ask the worst questions, and you learn almost nothing from most interviews. So when we set out to hire people, and I hired literally hundreds of people over the last 10 years, and I say we, myself and our senior leadership team, we started going out on the web. We started reading books and articles about what are the best interviewing questions out there. We came upon, oh my God, a great website that had 50 of the best interviewing questions. And we picked out, and it was amazing. Like, they had already thought about this. So we figured out a very, very curated approach to how to interview people. And it was rigorous, and it was thoughtful. And then we figured out a way. But the point of my telling you this is that we basically said, okay, how are we going to do the hiring of new employees the best that we possibly can? Let's go out on the web. Let's read everything we can. Let's steal all the best ideas. Let's adopt that for a process we use inside our company. And then let's hire the best people that way. And I will say, after the fact, that we had a track record at my last business where we had 100 employees by the time I exited that business. We had an extraordinarily good track record at hiring. We almost never I can't even remember a time where we hired somebody and after a month or two, it didn't work out.
And you
You
attribute
know,
it to the process that you created.
process. Yes, because we asked the right questions, we screened, we evaluated, we debated. Like we learned all these things by reading how do the most successful people do it. And I find that a lot of people in business think they know something. Oh, I know how to interview people. And they go into an interview and they ask yes, no questions and they speak, they don't do it well. And then they don't learn anything. And then when the person doesn't work out, they scratch their head and say, oh, well, that person wasn't good for the job. And the answer is no, you failed at screening. You failed at identifying the qualities that you wanted for that person. And so how do you avoid failure is you have to learn as much as you can. And so, that's an active curation, right? How do I curate the best information, select the best information so that I can address whatever the particular specific need is at the time?
So of course, online, everyone's an expert, right? So go back to any process you have by evaluating content. How do
Right.
you deal with competing content? Like, so you're looking at like, this person says, never ask that question. This person says, always ask that question. And like, what do you do? Like, how do you sort of navigate that sort of
Yeah.
ambiguity and conflict?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there's the thing called the smell test. I mean, you have to say, well, who is giving me that information, and do I think they're a credible source, and then is the other person a credible source, and then I would then take I mean, the other part of your question, which I'm guessing is going to come up, but I'll bring it up proactively, is that I'm a very big believer in mentors and coaches. And mentors and coaches, particularly for senior executives, for entrepreneurs, are really, really important because they keep you honest. And also, to your point, okay, you're trying to make a decision and some experts say this and some experts say this, and you're sitting there thinking, well, how do I? Well, that's what a mentor is for. And that's what a coach is for. That's what a board member is for. And you go to those people that are 10 or 20 or 30 years senior to you, and you say, look, I've got a fork in the road here. What would you do? And so there's many, many ways to get to an answer, but a lot of it requires talking to other people.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much for bringing that up because that's critical. Again, but then you've got mentors who don't agree with each other. That's like what a board of directors does. You got a board of directors and they're like, no, don't do that, do that. And the only answer is the one that works, right? That's the only one.
Look, you're not going to get everything right. You've got to navigate, and then ultimately you have to pick a plan and try it. And if it fails, I mean, there are plenty of times in my career, particularly in my early career, where I got, advice from board members that I ignored. And then many years later, I look back and thought, yeah, they were right. I was young and brash and I wanted to do everything. And they said, no, don't do that. And, luckily those were not catastrophic decisions, but that's what life is about.
It reminds me, as a consultant, people don't listen to me sometimes, and 2 years later they said, we should have listened to you because you actually had some really interesting ideas that we should have followed. But that's all in hindsight. So I'm intrigued by this. So mentors, any suggestions on how to find a coach or a mentor that really works for you? Should be in industry that you're working in? Should it be out of it? Should it be more general? Like, how do you find one, and how do you work with them and prepare them to support you?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. And I don't think there's a perfect answer there, except the way that I went about it was that I started asking other CEOs, who do they work with? How do they find their mentors? Where, whatever. And so there's a gentleman who became first an executive coach, and then ultimately a member of my board, and subsequently now a very good friend. This is a guy who I was introduced to several years before I needed to have. I had a very good coach at the time, and I was introduced to this gentleman, and we chatted, and it was okay. Nothing happened, but we stayed in touch. And then over the years, there was an opportunity where I needed that kind of coaching, but he was introduced to me by others, and I think personal references may be a very good way. There are also now the beginnings of mentoring and coaching websites that'll connect you with each other. There's things that didn't exist, networks out there. I also think that, like, there are people I follow on LinkedIn who do this for a living. They're entrepreneurial coaches, and they've got a stable of people they work with, and they publish blogs and they do interviews. And then I'm like, wow, that person's really smart. And then, so I think you have to keep your eyes and ears open, ask for references, but also kind of pay attention to who's saying things out there that seem smart to you.
Yeah, that's great. Great advice. So Gene, tell us, I mean, maybe I should have done this in the beginning, but we got it started on this conversation about learning. What are you doing now? And how did you learn about the problem you're trying to solve and, again, become wise about the industry?
Sure. Look, what I have experienced in my career and I've observed is that the best entrepreneurs are ones who are solving a problem that they themselves have either had in their own business or observed up close, so that they know in their bones that there's a problem that needs to be solved. So the business I'm running now, my two previous businesses were in the live event technology business. The last company I started was called Patron Manager. We provided ticketing and fundraising and marketing software for cultural groups, primarily museums, symphony orchestras, opera companies, dance companies. And we sold that business to an investor who then started to build that business with all other kinds of ticketing companies. And as a result, I got exposure, and I was at some of the biggest music festivals in the country. And I talked to folks, for instance, that are running Burning Man and big Comic-Cons. And I got to attend and go backstage and observe what was going on. And it became very clear to me in watching our own company on site at live events, having trouble communicating with each other. And why? If you can imagine a world in which, in the pre-internet world, if you're at, let's call it a big music festival, in the pre-internet world, the only way to communicate with each other was on a thing called a walkie-talkie. And a walkie-talkie is great. It's a brick, you carry it around with you. It was invented for World War II. But not everybody has a walkie-talkie, and now everybody has in their pocket a communication device called a cell phone. And they use that cell phone for text, WhatsApp, Slack, email, phone, all of those things. So now imagine you're running a music festival. You have a team of 200 people communicating with each other. 25 have walkie-talkies, and everybody else uses some other system to try to communicate. Now you have a complete mess of communication, because I'm getting on the walkie-talkie, I'm asking for something, somebody sends a Slack message, somebody sends a text message, nobody knows what they're doing. So my co-founder and I looked at this and said, boy, what if we could reinvent the walkie-talkie as a mobile app? What would that look like? How could we create essentially something that might work like Slack, which was designed for the desktop workers, but a communication system that's designed for people that are out in the field? So we built a company, it's called ALO, ALO.ai. And we're talking with people that use walkie-talkies, everything from sports stadiums to construction sites to zoos, aquariums, first responders, healthcare. There's a lot of folks that need to have better communication. So this is with my co-founder, our third startup. And I wouldn't recommend starting up a company in the middle of a pandemic. It's harder for sure, but that's the problem we're solving, which is the next generation of field team communications.
It's funny, I have a small team that I'm working with now, and I have the same problem. Like, I know they communicated with me. I've seen a note somewhere. I don't know if it's email or
Right.
Slack or text, or some of my people are on iChat and some people are on regular text, so I can't reach with iChat. It's like really complex, and I have to like remember where I heard from these people. So this is a problem, not just for the industries you're talking about, but
Sure.
especially now at the pandemic, because everyone's
Yeah.
moving, they're kind of moving around, they're not really moving around. but the most thing they have to do is communicate and do it effectively. So it sounds like a great
Yeah.
option.
Well, look, I mean, you know, you kind of scratch your head and say, how is it possible that the walkie-talkie has persisted since World War II? And if you say to yourself, in 10 years from now, everything is moving to the mobile phone, there needs to be a digital device that works just like a walkie-talkie. You press a button, you talk. But we're doing stuff that's really interesting. So for instance, you can push to talk in English, and somebody that speaks Spanish is going to hear it in Spanish, translated
Wow.
in real time. They're going to push to talk in Spanish. I'm going to hear it in English. Now imagine that you're running a big construction site and you have workers that are Polish, Russian, French, and English and Spanish, all working on the same job site, all speaking in their own language, but in real time, the technology is transcribing and translating it. You can't do that with a walkie-talkie.
You know, that actually happened here when we had a hurricane and we had trees down everywhere, and the crews were from Canada speaking French,
Right.
you know, Spanish, English, and they couldn't communicate. They're like, they had to do with hand signals. And because I remember talking to them, like the guy couldn't understand what I was saying, and they're coming
Yeah.
from all
So
over.
we're trying to look, to go back to the essence of your question, which is entrepreneurs need to understand in their gut the problem they're solving, and that's the kindling for the fire. They have to know that there's a big problem out there, and then after that, just start talking to people in the field, and they will teach you everything you need to know about your industry in ways that you may never have known before, and you'll just learn, and most of the ideas for your product are going to come from users. You
Yeah.
know, they're going to come to you and say, boy, I'd really love it if it could do this or this.
Yeah, there's a common theme in my interviews that come up, which is people learn from jobs they had before. And I always say the best ideas come out of exit interviews. And so that they couldn't do it while they were there, they went out and they started a company. So when you move into a new company,
Yep.
what's the transition between knowing there's a problem and doing the homework to figure out what do you have to learn about starting a venture, about how people communicate, about technology? Like, what was your journey as soon as you realized we're going to start this company and now we got to know something that we don't know? And
Yeah.
how did you figure that out? Instead of general, I listened to, you know, how I built this,
Right.
podcast. Like, what are you doing? How did you do that?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. So I work with a co-founder. He is the engineer, product, techie person. So we collaborate on everything. And the way that we got from the idea to, hey, we should really do this business, was that we created a PowerPoint with fake slides. We mocked up the product, and we sat down and did, I don't know, 25, maybe 50 calls with people in the industry. In our case, it was music festival people. And we showed them the PowerPoint. It took 10 minutes. We said, listen, do you believe there's a problem here? Do you have these problems? What if we created this product and we showed them slides that were just mock-ups? And we said, what if it did this, this, and this? Would you use it? Would you be interested? And we just let them talk. And they basically said, oh, that's interesting, and it should do this, and it should do that. So we basically went out without a product, but we started talking to the eventual users of the product to ask them, would they be interested, and to get good ideas. And we did enough of those. We did enough of those such that, you know, maybe through the 20th one, we started getting bored. Once you start doing them and you know what they're going to say before they even say it, then you've got enough information.
Yeah.
And we got to a point where we're like, you know what? This is real. This is not just us imagining something. This is real end users telling us that there's a real problem here to be solved that we can fix. So that's kind of how we got from point A to point B.
Yeah. So I know I work with entrepreneurs who do customer discovery a little differently than you're saying, but they do customer discovery. And do you find there's a direct correlation between what they say they would do and then when you have a solution, they're ready to jump on board and engage with you? Do you feel like there's that direct connection or not really?
No, I mean, you know, look, it's often the case that people you're going to get a bell curve, right? You're going to get a bell curve distribution of people that say I'm interested. But ultimately, once you build something, there's another layer on top, which is that certain personality types are early adopters and other personality types are not. Now, you can find, you can absorb great information about the industry by talking to those people. But you have to then layer on top, okay, is that person the kind of person that wants the new next shiny thing? Or is that the kind of person that wants to wait and let other people use it? So there's not a one-to-one relationship, but definitely out of that pool of people, there's going to be some percentage of those people that are going to be your early adopters.
Yeah. You know, a lot of, there's a common theme again, the people I've talked to talk about having jobs and getting frustrated and moving on. I think you have a job or a business, you learn something, you want to move to something new. If you think about a young person, 20 years old, in college, about to leave college, start a company, would you advise them to go get a job, get frustrated and start a company? Or do you advise them to like, oh yeah, just, you don't want a real job, just like make it happen? What do you think?
Yeah, no, it's excellent. Look, when I was growing up, the common wisdom was, get out of school, go get some job experience, get some life experience. If you want to be an entrepreneur, wait and do it later. And truthfully, I didn't start my first business. I think I was, geez, I can't remember, but I was 28 or 30. I think maybe 28 or 29. But the world is different now, and the barriers to starting a business are so much lower, particularly in the tech space, that and I was just talking, I have a couple of interns working for me now, and I was chatting with a gentleman, he's 20, and I was describing to him that when I first started a business, to start a business, you needed an office, which you needed a lease, and you needed furniture and a phone system and computers, and there was a big overhead before you could even say, I'm starting a business. Today, you can start a business in your living room. So the barriers to entry are much, much lower. I think that the answer to your question, however, is it really depends on the business problem that you're solving and the degree to which you understand the nature of the world that you're living in. I'll give you a great example. I've been working with, and I'm on the board of a startup in Pakistan. There's a young man who came to college in the United States, but he grew up in Islamabad, and he recognized a very big business opportunity that people in emerging markets, including Pakistan, all of Africa, many parts of Asia, don't have the ability to build their own websites in a very simple, easy way. And though there are products in the United States that allow people to build their own websites, those don't exist in emerging markets. And so he said, I want to solve this problem. I grew up in this country and I see so many millions of people that want websites, and it's hard. There's no way that I was going to advise him to go get a job for a couple of years and learn something. He was just going to jump in and solve this business problem. Now, if you're a biotech person, if you're, in a different industry, yeah, getting a job may be a good idea because you're going to learn something, you're going to build relationships with people. So it really depends on you, your personality, your level of risk, and also the industry that you want to go into.
So when you were younger and trying to navigate new knowledge and information, of course, the technology available is more, the internet is obviously more pervasive.
Yeah.
What do you wish you had to help you navigate the world of learning how to be good and smart in your field or in anything related to entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I think I think that I if I were to go back, I would say I would have wanted more advisors and mentors. I felt very much a solo operator. I'm going to go, I didn't have a lot of people. It is the case that people in, the 1980s and 90s, which is when I started certainly in the 90s, my business, being an entrepreneur wasn't a thing. Like it wasn't a thing that anybody did. You were out on the way edge of like, who starts their own business? Like, the thing to do when you were in those days was, go get a job at a consulting company or an investment bank or a Fortune 500 company, go work for American Express or IBM. Like that was seen as the thing to do. And the idea of dropping all of that and starting a business on your own simply wasn't common. It wasn't celebrated. It wasn't in the news. I mean, entrepreneurship was a thing, but it wasn't a big thing. And as a result, all of these resources that are out there today, whether they're angel groups or entrepreneur networks or things like, I don't know if you've heard of the thing called the Lunch Club, which allows you to meet people. It's an online service that allows you to just meet random people that share your interests and do a half-an-hour phone call or a lunch. Like none of that stuff existed. So I would have wished to have a bigger network when I started, but it just was harder. It was harder to meet people. It was harder to communicate. So
lastly, what should I have asked you that I did not, that you can sort of, about learning and about building your abilities to be a more successful entrepreneur?
sure. I think, first of all, we've covered a lot. I think I don't think there's any major area that we didn't cover, but I want to revisit something that I started with at the very beginning. I think that one of the real central keys to success in entrepreneurial activities is to make sure that you don't believe yourself over believing that other people can teach you something. There's a lot of entrepreneurs that get very set in their ways. They feel like they have all of the answers and they aren't therefore open to learning. And I think that the real heart of this discussion and the heart of your work is all about learning. And I just cannot emphasize enough the degree to which, as an entrepreneur, the more that you go out and try to learn what other people are doing, always say, gee, is there a better way? Is there somebody that knows somebody? Is there some thought that I haven't had? Is there some company doing something interesting that I should be aware of? All of that stuff is going to help you be a better entrepreneur. And so curiosity and your eagerness to learn, I think, is one of the most important ingredients for success, probably in all of business, but certainly in entrepreneurship.
Gene, as I listen to you, I want to thank you very much for your time and know that I wish I would have heard this when I started being an entrepreneur decades ago, but I want to thank you for your insights, your thoughts, your curiosity, because I think it's invaluable when people start thinking about what they're going to do, is this idea of curiosity and not knowing or knowing that you don't know everything, and that gives you the edge up on people who think they know everything on their own. So thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome.